You ever stop and think about how a hospital makes sure it has enough beds for a sudden emergency? Or how a tech company like Apple knows exactly how many iPhones to make for a new launch? Well, it all comes down to this incredible, high-stakes balancing act called capacity planning. And today, we're going to pull back the curtain on how it all works.
And look, in the business world, this isn't just some old saying. It's the absolute truth. If you've got too much of anything, too many factories, too many staff, you are just burning cash on resources that are sitting around doing nothing. But on the flip side, if you have too little, you can't keep up with your customers, and you end up losing sales, money, and your hard-earned reputation.
So what's the secret? How do the smartest companies on the planet solve this puzzle? The answer is a really powerful strategy called capacity planning. You can think of it as the art and science of figuring out exactly what you need, how much of it you need, and when you're going to need it. It's all about perfectly matching your strength with what the world wants.
To really wrap your head around this, you have to understand the core conflict here. It's a constant tightrope walk, right? You're balancing between two very different and very, very expensive ways to fail.
And this is a perfect way to picture it, using a hospital as an example. On one side, you've got facility oversupply. Every single empty bed is a cost. It's money just draining away, minute by minute. But on the other side, you have a capacity crisis. Imagine a public health crisis hits and there are no beds left. That means people being turned away, maybe not getting the care they desperately need. It really shows you how high the stakes are. Okay, so we get it. The pressure is on. But where do you even start to build a solution? Well, it all begins with a simple framework built around three incredibly important questions.
First up, what kind of capacity are we even talking about? Is it hospital beds? Is it assembly lines for cars? Is it data servers in the cloud? They're all totally different. Next, how much do you need? This is the big money question, right? You're basically trying to predict the future. And finally, when is it needed? Timing is absolutely everything. Do you build now and hope the customers come, or do you wait and risk being too late?
Now, let's clear something up, because this is a huge mistake people make. They think a facility's maximum potential is what it actually produces. Trust me, there is a massive difference between what the architect's blueprint says and what actually happens on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Let's break down the three real levels of capacity.
So first, you've got design capacity. This is the fantasy number. It's the on-paper, perfect world scenario where everything goes right. It's like a classroom that the brochure says can hold 70 students. That's the absolute peak performance.
But then, reality bites. And that brings us to system capacity, or what's sometimes called effective capacity. This is what you can practically achieve when you factor in real-world stuff, like machine maintenance, employee breaks, or even just the layout of the room. So that classroom designed for 70 students, once you realize everyone needs to actually see the whiteboard, it can only realistically fit 60.
And finally, we get to the number that really matters at the end of the day: actual capacity. This is the bottom line. It's what you truly produce. It accounts for everything: unexpected breakdowns, lower than forecasted demand, you name it. So in our classroom, even though it could hold 60, maybe only 10 students actually signed up and came to class. That's your actual output.
So you're juggling these three different numbers: the dream, the practical reality, and what happens day to day. How does a company know if it's actually doing a good job? Well, they use two key metrics to figure out the gap between the blueprint and what's really happening.
To make this crystal clear, let's walk through an example. Imagine a mobile phone repair shop. On paper, it was designed to fix 50 phones a day. But being realistic, with lunch breaks and trips for parts, its system can handle about 40. And on a typical day, the team actually repairs 36 phones.
The first metric is efficiency. And this shop, it's running at a pretty great 90% efficiency. Now, the key thing to get here is that efficiency measures your actual output against your practical maximum, that system capacity. In other words, it answers the question, how well are we using the resources that are realistically available to us right now?
The second metric is utilization, which comes in at 72%. Utilization is different. It measures your actual output against that original, theoretical maximum, the design capacity. So it's asking a much bigger, more strategic question. How much of that huge investment we originally made are we actually putting to work?
So how do we get those numbers? Don't worry, the math is super simple. For efficiency, as you can see here, you just take the actual output, 36, and divide it by the system capacity, 40. Boom, you get 90%. For utilization, you take that same 36 phones, but this time you divide it by the original design capacity of 50, and that gets you to 72%. See?
Two simple formulas that tell two very different but equally important stories.
Okay, so measuring today's performance is one thing. That's critical. But the real game of capacity planning is about making these massive, long-term bets on the future. So let's zoom out and look at the big strategic ideas that guide those huge decisions.
Every single business, whether it's a factory or a hospital, has a sweet spot. It's a Goldilocks level of production that's not too much, not too little, but just right for being as cost-effective as possible. In the biz, this is called the best operating level, and finding it is the whole point.
It all starts with this beautiful concept, economies of scale. The basic idea is that as your output goes up, the cost to make each individual item goes down. And why is that? Well, it's because you're spreading your huge fixed costs, like the building lease or the giant machinery, over more and more products. Each one has to carry a smaller piece of that financial burden.
But, and this is a huge but, there's always a tipping point. If you push your output way too far, you hit something called diseconomies of scale. The whole operation just gets too complicated, communication gets messy, and mistakes start to happen. And all of that actually makes the cost for each unit start to climb back up. Bigger isn't always better.
And that brings us to another really smart strategic idea, the capacity cushion. This is basically the extra capacity you intentionally keep in reserve just in case there's a sudden spike in demand or some unexpected disruption. You can think of it as your company's strategic spare tire. You hope you never need it, but you're so glad it's there when you.
So, we've talked about the risks, the big questions, the numbers to track, and the long-term strategies. How do you pull all of this together into something you can actually use? Well, it really boils down to a pretty straightforward 4-step roadmap for making these massive decisions.
And here it is. It's a really logical process. Step 1, you have to be brutally honest about where you stand right now. Step 2, look into your crystal ball and forecast what you think you're going to need down the road. Step 3, brainstorm all your options. Do you build a new factory, buy a competitor, or just hire a few more people? And finally, step 4, you weigh all those options and pick the one that gets you closer to your ultimate goal.
And that brings us to our final thought for today, and it's a question for you. If you had to add or remove 20% of your organization's capacity, literally tomorrow, what's the first thing you would change? Answering this gets to the very heart of capacity planning. It forces you to think about what's efficient, what's strategic, and what's risky. What's truly essential, and what's just excess. So what would you change?